Welcome back. Well, there is a significant portion of today's digital media populated by documentaries, podcasts, and films pertaining to infamous acts of murder and violent crimes, both fictional and non-fictional. That beast was not me. One forensic psychologist, 5 decades of conversations with killers, covers the life and work of Jeffrey Smalldon, who's here with us now. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, you have an interest in the field of psychology and crime that developed in your early years, I believe. So what can you tell us about your childhood and being, quote, hungry for color?
Well, I was the son of, I always describe my dad as a Hoover-era G-man, an old-school FBI agent.
Okay.
And when I was a kid, FBI agents got moved around every year or two. So I was frequently in the position of being the new kid in town, kind of feeling like an outsider. And I don't really know why, but from an early age, I was very interested in outsiders, unusual people, sideshow performers, snake handlers, criminals. So that got started early for me.
Okay, so your dad was an FBI agent.
Yes, he was.
Very cool.
Actually was in charge of the Niagara Falls office for years and worked out of Buffalo as well.
Wow, would you look at that? Okay, cool. Now, what was the crux in which you decided to pivot and switch your career to the field of psychology?
Well, in December of 1983, I was an up-and-coming young administrator at a large private general hospital in Columbus, Ohio, when 2 of my coworkers were murdered between 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right off the main corridor of the hospital. No one was arrested. No one knew who did it. No one saw anyone leave the scene of the crime. And before long, I decided this hospital administration thing had been a worthwhile experiment for me, but it wasn't the niche for me. So I went back to Ohio State and began work toward my PhD.
Wow. Okay, fascinating. Now, you have corresponded with infamous killers such as Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, and Ted Bundy. So what did you take away from experiences like that, and how did they translate into you writing this book?
Well, there are a lot of things, I think, that I took away from my experience corresponding with people like those that you mentioned. One is the extraordinary narcissism of those people, their virtual inability to see things from other people's point of view, their radical absence of empathy. They just don't think about other people and relationships the way most of us do. As far as writing this book, I was a forensic psychologist for 25 years. I worked on about 300 death penalty cases and many other kinds of cases. And the idea of writing a book was in the back of my mind for years. I knew I had accumulated a lot of uncommon experiences that I hoped other people would be interested in hearing about. Then along came the pandemic. I was retired by then, and I thought, well, it's finally time to sit down and devote the time to this. And this book was the result.
Now, walk me through how you mentally get ready to go into interview someone like these infamous serial killers. Do you get nervous? Do you get scared?
I spent about 20 hours with John Wayne Gacy on death row in Illinois. And this is someone known to have killed and tortured at least 33 boys and young men. So yes, I was nervous the first time I went in to see him, but my approach always in interviewing violent criminals is to try and create a horizontal communication plane. So I'm not talking down to them. I'm not communicating judgment. I'm communicating interest in hearing their point of view. And that's what I did with Gacy as well. And it worked pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're dealing with narcissists, if you come into a place of just wanting to learn about them,
they like to talk about themselves.
Right?
Exactly.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about your book and the different topics it covers spanning 5 decades.
Well, the beginning of those 5 decades, weirdly enough, is in 1975. I'm a 21-year-old, very naive but very curious undergraduate student. And my professor for a course in abnormal psychology had read Helter Skelter about the Manson case, and I had read it as well. So I stayed after class one day and talked with him, And I said, you know, it's weird, some of those people who followed him came from middle-class backgrounds, not unlike my own. I don't really understand how they fell under his spell. He was a career convict with a 4th grade education. And my professor said, well, have you ever thought about writing to them? And I said, no, never. And he said, well, maybe you ought to think about it. So I did, and I eventually began writing Manson, Squeaky Frommie, who gained her own brand of infamy for attempting to assassinate then President Gerald Ford in September of 1975. And so that was the beginning of the 5 decades, 1975. And then, I sort of thought that Manson chapter / murder chapter of my life was over after about 3 years. And then almost a decade later, 2 of my coworkers were murdered. And I thought, well, murder appears to be a theme in my life. Maybe I'll become a forensic psychologist.
Wow. That Beast Was Not Me. That's the title. Tell us about what the name meant.
Well, that title comes from the first proper letter Charles Manson ever wrote to me. And what he said at the beginning of that letter was, take all you've ever heard about me and think about it as backwards. Our side of the Manson family was never told. That beast was not me, but it's what everyone needs me to be, so they make me up to be a reflection of all their fears and lies. In other words, the prototypical boogeyman, but that's not who I am. And I learned over time that not just Manson, but most of these notorious killers strenuously resist the efforts by other people to define who they are, to describe their psychology, to account for their behavior. So I like that as kind of a theme. And the other dimension of my choice of that title was, it's often difficult to figure out where exactly to draw the bold lines separating those people from all the rest of us. Many of us fascinated by them, listen to true crime podcasts, read true crime books. So it's not always easy to figure out exactly where to draw that line. So I liked that beast was not me. It sounds like me saying, I'm nothing like those people, but throughout the book I raise questions about that.
Very, very interesting. Well, like you just mentioned, we know that there is a fascination about true crime, and I would love to learn more and talk to you. But I guess you put it all in a book for us, and you made it easy. So thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Viewers, if you would like to learn more about Jeffrey's work, you can visit jeffreysmalldon.com. Thanks again for coming in.
Thanks, Chelsea.